Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Hoops and Hip Hop and welcome to another episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. I hope everyone listening today, if you're listening the day this comes out, or if you're listening a couple weeks later, I hope you all had a very good Thanksgiving if you are from America, because the day this is going up on Friday is not only Black Friday, so be sure you're safe if you're out there shopping, but it's also the day after Thanksgiving, so I hope everyone had a great holiday with their family, friends, and I hope you guys are all going to have a great weekend as well. Like I said, if you're out there shopping, be safe, make sure you don't get trampled, hopefully you get what you want, and just hopefully you have a great time overall. It's definitely a fun type of year because holidays and Christmas and Thanksgiving and all that stuff, always really great. But with that being said, we are going to be talking about Pokemon as we usually do here on this podcast because that's what it's about. And it's going to be sort of an interesting one because, as I said last week, I believe I mentioned this, now that we're kind of in the post release phase of Pokemon Sword and Shield, the topics that we're going to cover are going to kind of be a little more interesting, a little more unique, I can feel, or I get the sense that that's kind of what they're going to be, just because we can't really talk about leaks or upcoming stuff because the game's out. We know what's going on. So we're going to have to, I guess, get creative with what we want to talk about and kind of apply just different things that are going on with the game, I guess, to different topics of conversation that'll be really interesting and we can kind of sink our teeth into. One thing that I should bring up, I guess, though, before we kind of jump into the main topic of conversation, is the fact that we actually got a new piece of content post-release. And it's not like DLC or anything, but basically the Pokemon Company revealed Gigantamax Snorlax that is going to be available in raid battles from December 4th, I believe, to early January, it's like January 5th or something like that. And that is really interesting, because you didn't really expect them to reveal something new for the game after release, and it's not like it's a DLC, it's not like an updated a piece of content or something like that. And then the other interesting thing is it's only for a limited time, so you can only get it for about a month and then it's gone, which all of that is very, very interesting because you wonder if it sets a precedent. Are they going to continually do this? Are they going to have new Gigantamax forms that pop out that are only available for a month or so before they go away? It's really hard to know, obviously, at this point, because we just have the one, but if that's the case, that would not only be a really good way of getting people to keep playing, but it's also going to be interesting because then that would mean we have new content to look forward to, obviously. That it's not done yet. Just because the game's out doesn't mean we're finished in terms of new content to look forward to. So that'll be really, really interesting to keep an eye on, especially because there's all those models and Pokemon within the data of the game that haven't been shown off yet. Gigantamax Snorlax was not among them, which kind of makes this even more interesting, but there's the Alola starters that are available. I believe there's a couple more starters after that. There's a bunch of legendaries, all in the data of the game, their models and everything, just completely within the game, just obviously have not been shown off yet. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with those guys as well, if those guys maybe have Gigantamax forms or Galarian forms or something like that. They just haven't shown them off. But like I said, the Gigantamax Snorlax was not among those guys. So overall, just gonna want to keep your eye on things. Don't want to let off the gas pedal or the magnifying glass or whatever you want to call it. In terms of keeping an eye on what the Pokemon Company's doing, because it seems like they've still got some stuff for us in terms of They still got a few tricks up their sleeve in terms of revealing things for this game, it looks like. But with that being said, we might as well go ahead and get into the main topic of conversation today, which is going to be the insane sales numbers that Pokemon Sword and Shield have enjoyed over the whole 2 weeks they've been out, because as of today, they've been out exactly 2 weeks. Within the first week or weekend, I'm not exactly sure, but basically after the first couple of days of Sword and Shield being out, it was reported that globally the game had sold over 6 million copies, which made it the highest, or not the highest, or I guess the highest technically, but the fastest selling Nintendo Switch game in that kind of same time period so far, which beat out Smash Bros., which was the previous record holder, which, if you know anything about Smash Bros. And how good Smash Ultimate is doing, that is saying something. And it's especially saying something when you think about all the other really, really good games that are on the Switch, like Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, just games that have sold a ton. And this game beat them all out, even with all of the controversy and stuff that's going on, which is insane. And then another sales figure that has been published as of this recording that is, I don't know if it's equally as impressive or even more impressive, but either way it's insane, is the fact that Pokemon Sword and Shield sales in Japan specifically have already eclipsed and sold more, basically, than the Let's Go games have to this point. So Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, their sales within a year in Japan have already been eclipsed by Sword and Shield sales numbers in Japan that's been out for a week. How insane is that? And Let's Go was not a pushover in terms of sales either, because in Japan it sold over like 1 million, it's like 1 million copies and change, like maybe like 1,100,000, 1,200,000, something like that. And Pokemon Sword and Shield's already eclipsed that, and then globally, Let's Go sold over 10 million copies as of like June. So it definitely did it. Like it was successful in its own right too. So to have Sword and Shield eclipse it, even if it's just in one country in a week, that's insane. That is saying something. And like, I don't think anyone expected this kind of performance from Sword and Shield in terms of the sales numbers, just because of all of the backlash that was going on. There was a funny post that was kind of like circulating, I think it was Twitter or something like that was from someone that was protesting the game, and they were like, dang, 6 million copies is a lot. Does it even matter if I don't boycott the game anymore? Like, that's kind of how crazy it's been. It really does not matter if you're a protester, if you're a boycotter, you're trying to demonstrate by not buying the game or whatever. Like, at this point, it really doesn't matter because it's already breaking records. It's already done better than you could even expect a Pokemon game to. Like, obviously, you can expect a lot when it comes to Pokemon game sales numbers, but it's arguably already done better than that pace, which is absolutely crazy. And the discussion I want to kind of have with these different sales numbers in mind is kind of, what does this like allow us to expect anything from Game Freak going forward? Now that we have an idea of how successful Pokemon Sword and Shield are, does this kind of make any difference in terms of like, where do we go from here? Overall, I would say it's kind of hard to say, just because Pokemon games always sell well, first of all. Second of all, with a company like Game Freak, it always seems like they know what their next move is before they even make it. A lot of companies, they kind of just, like with Zelda, for instance. Zelda is another game series that, like, obviously they plan ahead and they like prepare and stuff like that, but from like major game to major game, it seems like they put all their heart and soul into one game, and then when they are done, they kind of get started right away, but they get started at that point. So they really don't know what they're doing, I guess, until that like prior major title is finished. And I think that's kind of why we're getting Breath of the Wild 2, because they basically focused all their energy on Breath of the Wild, and then it was done, and then basically they just had a bunch of ideas for DLC and stuff like that ultimately just spurred them to make a new game, just because they had so many ideas. But obviously, like, the sales numbers and the popularity had a factor in that, and that's kind of why they were doing the DLC in the first place. So in that sense, sales and popularity had an impact on what they did, just because it was so apparent to them, and they were kind of like they hadn't really like made up their minds of what they wanted to do next, basically. So, but with Game Freak, it seems like, I mean, obviously it's impossible to say with any developer, but with Game Freak, it always seems like they've got the next thing already in the ropes, but that's not, or already in the works. I should say I think I'm mixing up my colloquialisms or my phrases or something. But yeah, it's hard to say, because Game Freak is an interesting thing. It always seems like they got something cooking. But with that being said, even if they have, let's say they got the next game already going, and it's Diamond and Pearl remakes, and it's coming out next year, and it's for the most part already set in stone. Even if that is the case, that doesn't mean that Sword and Shield and this whole game as a whole, from its sales numbers to its criticism to the way it performed, to all the feedback, that doesn't mean that can't have an influence on future Pokemon titles, because I believe in one way or another, somewhere down the line, eventually, whether it's with the very next game we get, whether it's with the Generation 9 titles, and it takes a few years to kind of materialize, these games will definitely have an impact on the future of Pokemon games, because of everything that has gone on, and because of their sales. Getting to the sales numbers specifically, since that's what we're talking about, I believe because of how many copies this game has sold, and because of how well it is sold, and even more so, like particularly so for a Pokemon game, because like I said, you can expect Pokemon games to sell well, but this game has sold particularly well even for a Pokemon game. I think that in terms of things they did, like particular features they used, like the wild area, probably most notably, you've got like Galarian forms and stuff like that, things that are like very well received within the game. I think I don't want to like get anyone's hopes up or anything, because Pokemon is so hard to predict when it comes to like what new features they bring back and stuff like that. But I feel like the bigger things of this game, you can expect to see at least included in some degree in the next title, or refined or revisited or something like that. I think you can, and I think this is definitely like with a focus on the wild area. There are other things, like obviously, like I said, Galarian forms and things like that can also be considered, but I think the wild area is like the flagship feature of this game. I think it's what draws a lot of people to the game in general. It's where people spend probably most of their time with the game, whether they're done with the game or not. Everyone has their own pace that they play at, but I know plenty of people who just they haven't even beat the game yet. They got it day one, but they haven't even beat it because they've just been messing around in the wild area the entire time. And then there's people like me who beat the game, but now it's like I get to get into the wild area, and it's giving me a reason to keep playing the game because there's just so much to discover. So I think the success of the game can be tied to the wild area, because the wild area itself is kind of like more or less the identity of the game as a whole. So I feel like this open world idea in Pokemon is going to continue to take shape and expand, and is going to be a part of Pokemon games moving forward because of how well this game is doing, which is obviously extremely exciting, because open world like features or mechanics, or just an open world game as a whole for Pokemon is something that pretty much everyone has wanted for a long time. So to kind of have a sense that this is going to be hopefully the new norm moving forward is extremely exciting. Like I said, it's so like it's impossible to really tell with Game Freak, and it kind of makes it a little bit nerve-wracking, because they obviously have a habit of introducing features and then taking them away and introducing new features instead in the next game, so that every game has something unique that it can offer. And so it's really, really hard to say if they're going to take something and run with it and do it again. Like Galarian forms, they brought those back, and it was a genuine surprise to everyone because everyone kind of had a sinking feeling that those would just be a Alola exclusive, but they weren't. And hopefully this is a sign that the wild area or the open world or an open world section of like the game, whatever it may be, makes a return. And ideally for me, I think what they need to do is kind of just like expand on the idea itself. Like make it a little bigger, make it a little better each game to the point where you reach the magnum opus of Pokemon in Gen 9 or whatever, and it's completely open world. And then at that point, you can decide if you want to keep going that direction or you want to do something different or whatever. Because throughout the whole Pokemon Sword and Shield release phase, interview phase, promotional phase, whatever you want to call it, Game Freak said that they like to leave themselves room to improve a little bit. They like to kind of like dip their toe in the water, so to speak, with certain features instead of just trying to take it on full force and like give themselves time to really like get a handle on it and be able to make improvements like with each and every entry, just so each and every entry, especially on one particular system, is like feels different. They don't all feel the exact same. That's kind of why you could say from Pokemon X and Y to 3DS, or from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon on the 3DS, there's obviously a big difference because X and Y were the first, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon were the last. You can clearly tell with Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon that they pushed that to the limit and improved a lot as well from X and Y, and they're most certainly going to do the same with Sword and Shield as well. So it's just going to be interesting to see what that entails for the wild area specifically. That's kind of what I would do if I was them. I would just, obviously it wouldn't be it wouldn't necessarily be called the wild area in every game. It would just be your designated, your whatever you want to call it, just open world section of the game, your obligatory open world section. And how it would function in every different game, whether it be Sword and Shield or the Diamond and Pearl remakes or whatever, it's obviously going to be a little bit different. And when it comes to Diamond and Pearl remakes, it's going to be interesting because if they do indeed happen in this generation, I would imagine that it probably wouldn't have a open world section of any sort, just because the original didn't, and with remakes they kind of they don't want to overhaul anything too drastically, and to make a big thing like that, a big open world area, they would have to do some overhauling, either in the form of just sticking a new area like that in the region, which would kind of just mess everything up, so I don't think they would do that, or they would just make all of the routes really big and kind of just give a whole lot more explorability in them, which I don't think they will either, because they usually stay pretty true to form when it comes to remakes, which isn't bad. So I don't think we'll see anything too crazy there. We might see maybe the Safari Zone, because there is a Safari Zone in Sword and Shield. It could be a lot bigger and open-ended, and that could kind of be maybe the open world experience. But overall, I think it'll be pulled back a little bit for the remake, just because it's a remake. But then in the Sword and Shield third game, or the Generation 9 games down the road, whatever it is, because I'm pretty sure Generation 9 is still going to be on the Switch. It'll probably be the last games that are on the Switch. But that's where we'll really see the continuation of the wild area open world mechanic really start to take shape. And it'll be interesting to see what changes and improvements they make directly with the third Sword and Shield game, if they end up doing that. But overall, I feel like that's what's going to go on. I think because of the huge sales numbers and the positive reception to Sword and Shield as a whole, but specifically the wild area, because like I said, that's kind of the flagship feature of this game, is the wild area. So it owes much of its success to that feature. The games, anyway, do. So because of that, I think that's the one thing I would feel fairly safe betting on, is that we can look forward to seeing a continuation, an expansion, just a further development of the open world mechanic that has now been introduced in Pokemon. Hopefully, one thing that I would like to see is hopefully with the next games, whatever they may be, that they allow for camera control, the free camera control that's only in the wild area, to be in the entire game. I think that would be a nice, like I said, like that's room for improvement that they can make, and they can make that pretty easy. So in the next games, if they did that, that would be a nice step forward, nice step in the right direction. It would align with their philosophies pretty well, and it would just be really nice, because having that kind of control in the wild area with the camera, it really makes you feel like you're kind of playing an intense game, for a lack of a better term. A game that really is like, yes, I'm adventuring, I can like look at the scenery, I can move stuff around. Really feels like a more intense, like hardcore RPG now that you can do that. And not to say that like it's terrible when you go in like the routes in the cities and it's a fixed camera, but every once in a while, after like roaming in the wild area for a bit, you'll go to move your camera around when you're in like a city or a route or something. You're like, oh yeah, I can't do that in this area anymore. And it's like, it's not a huge deal, but it's like you get a little bit bummed out because of that. So hopefully in the next games, that'll be like a minor step up. It'll be one of those improvements that they've left themselves room to make. And it'll just be fantastic. Let's see. As far as anything else, we might as well get to the criticisms, because I think the criticisms that the game has received will definitely impact how the games themselves are how they're developed moving forward. I think Game Freak will definitely take those into consideration. It's really hard to say how much to heart they'll take them in terms of the changes they make to what they were going to do, because I really don't think it's going to get us a national dex. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do feel pretty safe in saying that those complaints, those criticisms, that feedback will make some type of impact, because Game Freak does listen to criticism, they do listen to feedback, and they do implement it into their games. So I know it's going to have an effect. I just don't know what kind of effect it's going to have. Overall, I could say it's positive, because obviously with the feedback that was so strong with the game, it was about things that obviously people felt are bad. And so if Game Freak's going to address that, they're obviously going to address it in a way that fixes those things, that makes them better, nicer, just not as worthy to be critiqued and criticized and yelled and screamed about. So it's going to be good, but overall, I think the nice thing about this, with the other stuff that we just talked about, the sales figures making an impact and the success of the game making an impact, how both of these come together and really bring this game full circle, that I think is really, really nice, is that it very uniquely kind of has the best of both worlds, because it's got success, unprecedented success, record-breaking success, for both the Nintendo Switch and for Pokemon, that it can use to reinforce what they're doing and let them know that, yes, this is what we want. We want to go in this direction. We want more open world. We want more Pokemon to catch. We want games on the Switch. We want more home console games. But then at the same time, it doesn't, like, the feedback kind of reminds them that there's still more to do. Like, you can't just, because this game sold so well and just did amazing, because it is a great game, even with that said, you can't just rest on your laurels and be like, okay, we just have to make Sword and Shield again and just make the same game and we'll be fine, which Game Freak wouldn't do, because that's not who they are, obviously. But basically what I'm trying to get at is that the success gives them a direction with which they now know that they can go and will be like what the fans want, the direction that the fans want. But the feedback and the criticisms will kind of keep them in check and remind them that, hey, there are still some things we need to work on. There's still some things we need to improve. We really need to kind of make sure we address these while at the same time enhancing the experience that we know people love. And overall, I think that is a perfect recipe for a fantastic, just like out of the park Pokemon game in the future, because you've got success to pull from, you've got criticism, not necessarily failure, but criticism to pull from that will definitely be pulled from because of how loud and clear it was. Like Game Freak came out and kind of made a statement about it themselves. That's how loud it was. So they'll basically be able to take the good with the bad and just mush it together and just kind of just sculpt it out and chisel away and look at their notes and see what they need to do to kind of balance what they did good and what people really enjoyed about this game and what people would have liked to have seen better. Like both of those voices are really, really loud, and I think that's what is going to be the best thing that comes out of Sword and Shield, because both of those voices being so loud is what's going to allow the next game to be better. With other games like Breath of the Wild, like, yeah, Breath of the Wild has things that it could do better, but overall it's such an amazing, fantastic, beautiful, wonderful game that people just like to praise, and literally the praise for the game drowns out the minor critiques and complaints that there are. You could obviously see how you could very easily just make Breath of the Wild again and people would love it because people love the first one. So the fact that with Sword and Shield by comparison, there are things that people just love the heck out of and are so strong about that, but then there's things that people don't love and are very strong about that. Both of those voices are equal and one is not going to drown out the other. So in effect, as Game Freak, you have to address both of them. And if you're addressing both of those things and refining both of them and making both of them better, and then obviously bringing that together in one package, I think that only spells fantastic news for whatever Pokemon game this eventually gets applied to. And so overall, I think both of these things, I think the fact that there was criticism, there were critiques, there was feedback, but then also the fact that the game did really well regardless. It sold like fantastically. People were very vocal with what they loved about the game. I think the fact that both of these things specifically happened and not one without the other is going to make for the best Pokemon game experience moving forward, because Game Freak is going to be able to take equally from them. And when you can take equally from the good and bad, then you'll eventually end up with a great product for yourself. So I think if it does indeed end up that way, which I feel like it will, that's a very, very poetic way for this to all kind of come to a head, come to a close, which I think is really great, because if that does indeed end up being the case, it'll be a very happy ending for all parties involved, and we can kind of just get back to the way Pokemon's supposed to be, with the positivity and the hype about the games and stuff like that. But with that being said, that pretty much wraps up my time for today's episode. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to follow and leave a like wherever you're listening. If you're on YouTube, you can always leave a comment as well. Let me know what you think about this. Like I said, hope you guys all had a great week. Thanksgiving, Black Friday, whatever you're doing. I hope you do have a great weekend as well. And be sure to tune in next week, as always, for another interesting episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. You can also check my channel out too if you haven't yet. Just saying, feel free. But yeah, with that being said, I'll be back next Friday with another episode. So until then, as always, hope you guys have a great week, a great weekend, and I will smell you guys later.